Hello, Sebastian Lacido here, and welcome to Line Upon Line, where we study a book of the Bible verse by verse. We're going to jump into Daniel chapter 8 today. We're going to cover half of it today and half next week. It's a pretty straightforward book. Next week, the second half has a lot to do with Antichrist, and we'll start to get into some of the meat of that, of those prophecies. So Daniel chapter 8 and verse 1, it says, "In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Eula. Then I lifted up my eyes, and I saw there standing beside the river was a ram that had two horns." So he sees a ram that has two horns. But one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So the smaller one came up first, the larger one came up last. Naturally, we're going to go through all this. "I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no animal could withstand him." That means no nation could withstand him. "Nor was there any that could be delivered from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. And I was considering, and suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat was notable. It had a notable horn between its eyes." So he sees a goat, and it has one horn between its eyes. "Then he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram, and he was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground, trampled him. There was no one that could deliver the ram out of his hands. Therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken off, and in its place was four notable ones that came up toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land," which is Israel. "And it grew up to the hosts of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgressions, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice and cast them down to the ground. He did all of this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking to another holy one," these are two angels, and one said to the certain one who was speaking, "How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both sanctuary and the host trampled underfoot?" He said to me, 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. That was the angel Gabriel. So I read through it. I want to go through it now verse by verse. This is the first half. So first of all, the ram and the goat are the Medo-Persian Empire and the Grecian Empire. So Daniel is currently, with the Persian Empire. So he's currently an official, actually, in the Persian Empire. So he sees that the Persian Empire is going to continue to reign and then be broken. So I'm going to have to look at my notes a lot today because I have a lot of historical dates. So the initial vision is of Persia and its conquest, moving west and toward Babylon, to take over Babylon. Persia's conquered Babylon in 12 years. In 539 BC, Daniel was serving in the Babylonian government prior to Persia coming in and taking over. That happened actually in chapter 7. And Babylon's downfall would have been considered treason. So the ram with the two horns are the Medo-Persian Empire. The larger horn was the Persians, because they became very great. So when you look at this vision of the ram, the Persian Empire, it also correlates to the bear in Daniel chapter 7 and to the arms, chest and arms of silver in Daniel chapter 2. So as Daniel goes through these Gentile empires that were all a type of Antichrist empires, you see that in chapter 2, verse 32, he says that the chest and arms of silver, that's the Medo-Persian Empire. And again in chapter 7, he sees a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, because there were 3 nations that came together. And that's the Medo-Persian Empire. Again, the 2 horns, the higher one is Persia. The ram was pushing or making conquest west, north, south. And when you look at history, the Persian Empire, pushed westward toward Babylon, Syria, Israel, all of Asia Minor, and Macedonia. Northward, they went into Armenia, the Caspian Sea, toward the Caspian Mountains. And when they went southward, they went at Egypt, and they eventually took over all of those areas. So they became very great. So when you look at verse, I think it's verse 5, Daniel sees a male goat. And this male goat has 1 horn. And in your notes, if you're getting your notes, that's Greece. And he actually says it's Greece later on in the teaching. But the male goat, which is Greece, came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. So this shows with tremendous speed. And the goat had a notable horn. That's Alexander the Great. Then he came to the ram, and he was furious and used his power against the ram. So here we see the male goat under Alexander the Great, and this equates to, in chapter 2, to the thighs and the thighs of bronze, the belly and thighs of bronze, which is in chapter 2, but it's the leper with the 4 wings in Daniel chapter 7. So again, we're seeing this consistency with these 2 empires. And not touching the ground, historically, when Daniel went when Alexander went to conquer the known world at that time, he did it in about 12 years. And so when you look, and then, the Bible tells us that 1 horn was broken off, and then 4 notable horns came up from it. And so when we look at what's happening here, Greece comes in and begins to take over and trample the entire earth, taking it back from the Persians, away from the Persians. The Bible said he did it with rage, with power. He broke the 2 horns. There was nobody that could stop him. Alexander's triumph was very fast. It was very dramatic. He may have been the brightest, most intelligent military leader in the history of the world. But anyway, when you look at verse 8, his horn is broken off this male goat. 4 notable horns come up, which are the 4 generals that were served under him. So Cassandra took over the Macedonian and Greece. Lysimachus ruled over what would be Bulgaria, Asia Minor, Turkey. Ptolemy took over Egypt, Cyprus, and Israel. And then Seleucus ruled over Syria, Babylon, southern Turkey, Persia, and the regions to the east. Seleucus' kingdom was larger than the others of these. Okay, so a little horn, the 4 horns are the 4 generals. The little horn that comes up, which the language here is, it can get confusing. First of all, the little horn here, I believe, is Antichrist, because there is a type and a shadow of Antichrist called Antiochus Epiphanes, which in the year, I think it was, I have it in my notes, from 170 to 164 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, as a type of Antichrist, went into the temple. He stopped the daily sacrifices, and he sacrificed a swine, a pig, on the altar to Zeus, who is his god. And so he was a type of Antichrist, and he only killed about 100,000 people. The reason that I don't think, and a lot of commentators don't think, that Daniel, speaking of Antiochus, is three reasons. One is he never proclaimed himself to be God. He just desecrated the temple, and he he killed 100,000 in the city of Jerusalem, which is quite a bit for that time period. But he never proclaimed himself to be God. He never had global influence. I mean, his influence was Jerusalem. He took over that area. Remember, everything was divided. And then this verse, these next verses, I think, which are some of the most complicated verses in Scripture. Because here's what it says. The little horn grew up to the host of heaven. Now, the host of heaven means the armies of heaven. And it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Okay, so the hosts of heaven are angels. So what man, Antiochus Epiphanes did not do this. Antichrist will do this. Antichrist will have the power and authority to cast down angels from heaven, because in Revelation chapter 13, Satan gives him his throne, his power, and his authority. So what does this mean? Because we have to, this is, and I believe God gave me the interpretation of this. When you look at Satan's kingdom and God's kingdom, in God's kingdom, it's very structured, and there's one group. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in God. We believe in the Word of God. Satan, on the other hand, is the god of the atheists, the god of the Buddhists, the god of the Muslims. He's the god of all of the other religions in the world, including atheists. So when Antichrist comes to power, two things happen on that very day. In Revelation chapter 12, and I think I made a note in my notes, yes. So when Antichrist goes into the temple, before he goes into the temple, and he proclaims himself to be God, and he sets his image up there, not a pig, his image up instead of God's. Okay, and Daniel calls it the abomination of desolation. Jesus told us to study this, because when you look at Matthew chapter 24, he says, "He who is understanding, let him understand." So what starts Great Tribulation first is Satan is cast to the ground and all of his legions of angels, which means that they function on earth. So I don't think anybody realizes how great and how terrible Great Tribulation will be. I think there's no way for us to describe it or put it into words. It's going to be devastating on the earth. But here's the thing. Michael cast Satan to the earth with all of his angels. All of the demons are now on earth. Satan transfers his power to a man, and that man is Antichrist. And he gives him his throne, his power, and his authority. So now, as Antichrist is going out to make conquest, we know from the book of Daniel that every nation on earth has principalities and powers over it, right? So for instance, over China, there is a spirit, an evil spirit of communism and authoritarianism. And so for Antichrist to go in and take over a nation, he tears down the host over those nations. This is very interesting because nowhere in Scripture do we see this. So when you go back and you read through it, verse 10, and it, the little horn, grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and the stars to the ground and trampled them. In other words, he removed them from their authority. He's not going to do that with God's elect angels. He does that because remember, his kingdom, even though Jesus said a house divided against itself, he can't control his kingdom. I mean, he has two opposing armies that he's the God over, fighting each other on the earth today. So the Bible tells us that he grows up to the host of heaven. And so when you look at this, this is why this is so dramatic, the authority that this man has. We don't understand it. When Jesus was on earth for his 3.5 years, the hosts of heaven helped him, right? They encouraged him when he prayed. They visited him. The Mount of Transfiguration. We see that two saints were, Old Testament saints were there, but angels were there. Angels were around Jesus and were part of his ministries. So I believe that when he casts some of the hosts of heaven down, he's actually taking over physical territory by taking over the physical, spiritual authority first. And so when this happens and he desecrates the temple, we see how long, verse 12 says, how long concerning, both the sanctuary being cast down and the host being trampled underfoot. And so, I don't think this is Antiochus Epiphanes. Next week we'll go through the attributes. I think Daniel's seeing into the Antichrist, which you'll see again, in future chapters as we go through it. And so when you look at where this particular little horn came from, it's from parts of the Middle East, Europe, and actually Israel. It's from, I think it's from the General Seleucus. So when you look at this, it says he even exalted himself as high as the Prince of Hosts. Jesus, right? He exalted himself up to the Prince of Hosts. And the daily sacrifice was taken away, and a place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgressions, armies were given over to the little horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast down to the ground, and they did all of this and prospered. So he exalts himself up to the level of Jesus spiritually. He makes himself a Messiah. He manhandles spiritual hosts in heaven, right? And so we see that, as he continues to roll and continues to expand his kingdom, we see that, that there's this 2,300 days that he desecrates the temple. Now, that's about 6 years, and I think it's 40 months or 4 months, something like that. But here's the thing. He signs a covenant agreement that we'll see in future chapters for 7 years, and he allows it to go back to the sacrificial system. We know that Great Tribulation would be only 1,230 days. So he's going to answer that now. So I don't want to confuse you. Let's go back. Let's read verse 13. So they ask, how long will this be? And we heard the 2,300 days. He said, and I heard a holy one speaking to another holy one, an angel to an angel, and a certain one speaking, how long will the vision be? How long will it continue? That the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host being trampled underfoot, he said 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So 2,300 days, the sanctuary will be cleansed. Okay, so we need to understand these dates. So as we go and we see that there's 2,300 days, the next verse says, from the daily sacrifices being taken away, this is in Daniel chapter 12, from the daily sacrifices being taken away and the abomination of desolation being set up, shall be 1,230 days. That's 42 months. So there's 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary will be clean. These two events will happen simultaneously when Jesus comes back. When we look, Jerusalem's destroyed, the temple set up, and so the 1,230 days is really the Great Tribulation period. So when you look at the 2,300 days to try and understand them, Antichrist will betray Israel, and it'll start 2,300 days before the sanctuary is cleansed. So the beginning of some kind of resistance to the sacrificial system will begin in that first 3.5 years. So when we read forward in Daniel chapter 9, Antichrist will confirm a covenant for 7 years, and in the midst of it, in the middle of it, he will go into the temple, stop the daily sacrifice, set up the abomination of desolation, which is his image in the temple. But what the Bible's telling us here is that even prior to that, he's going to begin, even after signing the agreement, to start a resistance before the temple's cleansed. Because the temple will be cleansed in Revelations 19 when Jesus cast Antichrist and the false prophet into the lake of fire, and Armageddon occurs, bloods to the bridle of the horse. He removes all of the enemies out of Jerusalem and the world and sets his kingdom up. So the Bible's giving us sort of a hint here that even before Great Tribulation, we'll see a movement of Antichrist. In other words, he signs the agreement, but he's working against the covenant immediately. But he stops the sacrifice for 1,290 days, or 43 months, roughly. So the 2,300 days, I did some research. There's 3 different views. The destruction, the last 2,300 days, or 6 years and 4 months and 20 days, is the desecration of the temple occurs, but the sacrifices continue. He may set up his image prior at the temple site. We don't know. Another theory says that there's 1,150 mornings and 1,150 evenings, which total the 2,300 sections, right? I don't believe that. Symbolically, 2,300 days is a number. Other numbers of Daniel are taken literally. There's no reason that this should be symbolic. So some believe that Antichrist actually puts an army in place, even though the Jews are doing the sacrifices again. The armies of Antichrist are in the temple and around the temple. So in a way, it's desecrated, but they didn't stop the sacrifices, and he didn't, put himself to be God. So when you look at Daniel's prophecies, when you look at the entire book of Daniel, you're looking at a guy who over 2,500 years, 2,500 years ago, spoke things that in great detail. Remember, he's talking about things that happened, 100, 200, 2,000, 2,500 years after, with great detail. I mean, I think one of the things when we get to heaven, I believe that the wise men, the hundreds of wise men that came, from the east to Jesus to bring him gifts, were because of Daniel's writings that were there. We see 12 chapters, right? We see 6 chapters under the Babylonian rule. Chapter 7 through 12 are under Persian rule. But he talks about the kingdom that's going to take over not only Persia, but then Rome, who takes over from Greece. And so with great precision, such a great prophet. Next week we'll get into Antichrist. This week, I'm sorry it was so technical and sometimes it got confusing. But anyway, I pray that God, through these messages, would speak into your heart and mind about the awesome power of God. Daniel, one of our brothers, speaking in the future. We can trust a God who knows the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end. We can trust a God who loves us, who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and ever-present. And so, I pray that these sessions build your faith, and I pray that it shows you that even though I believe that you and I, or at least our children, are going to walk into great tribulation. I don't think it's that far off. I'm 64. I think it could happen in my lifetime if I live long enough. And let me just say, it's going to be horrific. It's going to be terrible. The Bible tells us in Matthew 24, there's no other time in history that even comes close to it. So please, here's the 3 things I'd like you to do. Please share this with family and friends. Help us grow. We're a completely remote ministry. You're our congregation. So by sharing this, you give us opportunity to speak in someone else's life. If we're speaking into your heart, please pray about becoming a partner with us, help support us. I'm not asking for a lot, 10, $20 or more a month, to help us in our effort to preach the word. We have 11 broadcasts a week. We do 6 5-minute devotions every day, Monday through Saturday, just 5 minutes. We take a scripture, drill down on it. It's called 5-Minute Fresh Start. We have a censored blog called Headline and Prophecy we do on Monday. We teach a general Bible study on Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Line Upon Line is Thursday morning. We do a book of the Bible verse by verse. Friday is our private blog called What I Really Think. I'm changing the format of that to half Bible prophecy teaching and half commentary on politics, business, finance. And then on Saturday we teach eschatology or end times at 10 a.m. Our website has several curriculums that are free to you. Just become a member. Your name and email address. We don't sell it to anybody. We don't give it to anybody. Nobody uses it. But we do send you notes for all of our Bible studies. Today's notes were 9 pages or 8 pages long. So you get these notes sent to you before. And you can actually do your own study without the live video. So anyway, that's our Line Upon Line today. God bless you. And I pray that God's face would shine upon you, that you'd have a blessed week. And if you have any questions, email them to me at contact@watchersoftruth.com. Donations are at watchersoftruth.com. And all of our curriculum are at watchersoftruth.com. God bless you and have a great day. Thank you.